So that's great. So I'm excited to introduce Mary Ann Smith, who is going to give a talk titled Finding a Place to Plant a Seed. Mary Ann V. Smith is a biology and chemistry faculty member at Penn State Schuylkill who specializes in sustainability education. She focuses her work on finding new ways to engage students in the environment and more sustainable living practices. If you have questions or comments for Mary Ann, please enter them into the chat. Natalie is there in the chat to ask any or answer any immediate questions. And then at the end, we're going to have time to answer Mary Ann or ask our questions of Mary Ann. So thank you so much for being here, Mary Ann. I will turn the floor over to you.
Thank you guys so much for having me. And I am really thrilled to be able to talk to you guys a little bit about some of the work that I do at Penn State Schuylkill. There we go. And this little presentation I'm calling Finding a Place to Plant a Seed. And you might not think that maybe the college realm has something to offer to a lot of community-based educators, but I'm hoping that you can see some of the things that we do are because along the way, not as many communities have had those opportunities. So I want you guys to take a minute and think first about, when did you learn about gardening? Did you learn it from your parents, your grandparents, a relative? Did you learn it from a neighbor? Learn it in school? Watch a video online? Stumble into it as an adult and just try doing it? Or was it something else? You know, put your whatever letter kind of best fits you into chat. I'll give you a second here. Okay, because part of where you get your gardening might teach us about where we're seeing some of these things even into adulthood. So we see some responses coming in. Okay, a lot of folks are getting it from relatives, friends. Gardening with my dad, that's a great one. Was my mom, but also my dad. Some E's. I love it, E, and I'm so jealous of people who learned as kids. A little B. Trial and error. Okay, so a lot of us are finding this as an adult. I'll say I had it as a kid, kind of lost it for a while, and then kind of came back. So, but where are so many of our other young people kind of coming to this? Watching TV videos online is probably one of the biggest now, that things like Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube, of course, are places where people are getting inspired. Sometimes great, sometimes not, because we're doing some challenges that aren't so great. But we also have a large group who have never taken care of a plant. That the plants might be their parents, they have plants in their house or at a relative's house, but they've never actually had that responsibility of taking care of that plant and getting it from a seed all the way to a plant, or even picking something up at a nursery and getting to that final plant. So this is kind of a population I generally work with, so that we do see some students who will have parents and grandparents or relatives who are doing it. And let me also put this in context. So many of my students also live in communities that are very agricultural, but they themselves are not the ones who are into that. And sometimes they're even afraid of it. But when we look at this in a grander context, right? So we're in suburban Pennsylvania for my campus and even where I live. And we see that, yeah, there's a disconnect to our food, but even across the nation, this is even bigger. That food insecurity is still a major factor. 13.5% of US households are food insecure, and even more with children. So when we kind of consider that in grand numbers, 47.4 million people across the United States are food insecure. And many of them are female heads of families with children, and that puts them at greater risk and helps reduce some of those nutritional benefits that we all know food has. But partially why? Why are we so disconnected to our food systems? And how does that actually help us take a look at it? And we go through these trends that we have about this 10 to 16% range of people who are food insecure and or have low food insecurity. And that's been going on for decades. And if we even go farther back, these trends continue. So how do we actually get past this? And how do we actually teach people that even small things are doable? You don't need to have 12 acres in order to be able to grow some food. You don't need a huge backyard garden in order to have some things that you can help your family as even supplemental foods. So this is where I think that gardeners and teachers do have the ability to help make change, that we can help bring skills and bring in moments of experience to students. So what can we do? Well, part of it is I love stories. And do we think about any of those great lessons, friendships, stories that came from your early gardening? Like even if I consider, yeah, my family did the gardening, 2 doors down, my one neighbor did have a larger spread and taught me about different types of vegetables that my family wasn't growing. Things like dill were very popular in their household because they would be making their dill pickles every season. But how do we still have some of that stuff? And I argue it's still there, but I think in many cases, especially for those who might be in suburban and urban settings, a lot of that's even further reduced to make it harder for younger people to have those early experiences. So then what can our gardens and gardening help us do? They can help us provide food security for portions of our population. Our campus garden actually has offered times where not only can you get space to grow what you would like, but we'll often have excess. And some of the other Penn State campuses across Pennsylvania have those abilities where we're actually able to help our college students. Because you may not know, but a lot of college students also face food insecurity, even when they're on campuses and they're working to try to afford all of the different necessities. But one of the bigger pieces, I think, is actually helping change our perceptions of food by getting people reconnected to their food. If people can actually see how easy it can be, even if it's something like a simple herb that they can grow themselves in a small little pot, it actually gives them some impact and can make a memory. Because when you have those experiences, have those memories, it is more impactful and is something that can stay with you longer. So in many ways, that can help us change how people are accessing their food and hopefully reduce some of their costs. We all know that food, unfortunately, has become extremely expensive, and especially for families. So then within my role as a college professor, what I see is that gardening is another way of lifelong learning, that even though in some way or another I've gardened since I'm a little kid, I'm always learning something new and learning from others around me in community. So I try to bring this actually to my students so that they actually have some of these moments where it's like, oh, I could actually do this. Because so many of my students have never had a plant, or more importantly, Miss Smith, don't give that to me. It's just going to die. I have a brown thumb. I cannot grow anything no matter what. And then they'll tell me often, oh, I can grow a succulent. I'm like, well, then you grew something. We just got to find you the right kind of plant. Maybe there's just something different. Maybe it's about changing what you think you can grow versus what you potentially should be growing. So my idea is, how do we change perceptions? Let's get them in there. So how can we get more experiences? I want to be able to get students into moments where they're going to be able to have it. And our community garden was this great idea that we would have students coming out and they'd help with the gardening. But I live in Pennsylvania, and our gardening season really is more like June, July to August, September. So my students go home the first week of May. They don't even get to the Mother's Day plantings that we could potentially do. So there's no one really to take care of it except for those of us who are either extremely local or who are faculty and staff. That takes out that, again, student experience. So it started to get me rethinking, how can we actually utilize things? It's like, well, do I start the garden and then bring them in later? And that was a lot of work. We tried that portion. But part of it is trying to take small resources and actually see how we can expand opportunities to them. I know that when you're working with children, especially, you may have large groups. We just did a session earlier this summer with 160 students. 160 kids starts to add up. So how can we actually do things cheaper and smarter? So that's kind of where my journey begins. That I had students who really wanted to do something. They wanted to be involved in our garden. And when it came to getting them out there, it's like, I have to have everything set up because by the time they're on campus, we're into our late growing season. And half of the things they would want to grow are going to be gone. Starting tomatoes from seed in August and putting them out in the garden to grow is not going to be as productive as something that was put out earlier that summer. So when that started, it got me thinking, how can I actually make this work? So I then just started that next spring trying to design activities where the students would actually participate in our fall harvest and then create a meal from it. And everything was got on track. We started getting the plants. We started getting some of the garden reset. And then this little virus you might have heard of came about, AKA COVID, and kind of pushed out all of my plans so that the kids went home in March of 2020 and only a small portion came back in person in fall. That my class of 30 ended up being about 7 people actually in person with me. All the rest were online because of fears of COVID at that time. So it's kind of leading to this. I'm rebuilding this entire project on the fly, going from this big community garden, okay, about an acre spread, to a pot that every kid is going to be able to take home and be able to work on. So that first year, because we really were doing this on the fly, and that's actually a picture of one of the boxes we were shipping, and we were shipping them basically up and down the East Coast. Some students who were nearby were able to pick them up or got them before they went home, but we are sending things out to Atlanta, to Wisconsin, even down to like Kentucky and Wisconsin, because we had some students from different parts come out to Little Schuylkill. So the students would actually request seeds from our institutional seed bank, and we had started that earlier in the spring as part of an effort to get people gardening again. And then the students would take care of the plant the entire semester and then consider changes in their area as well as potentially rooms as they were working. And we had some mixed successes, but generally all students were able to grow something. How far it actually got to further success led us to some of these ideas that we need to change some things. From a full list of everything available in our seed bank, which was at the early days, probably about 100 different seed types, to narrowing it really far down to a list of about 10 different seeds. It's not that I don't want to offer that entire success, but the biggest things in those early years that students were trying to grow were pumpkins and watermelon. And starting them in August and September is not very productive for northern climates. So they'd get really frustrated, and that was not the intent. The intent was to give them this really happy experience where they could grow something and potentially expand out into learning about other things. So then, okay, let's go and narrow down some of the things that we've been working with that'll help increase their success. But one of the bigger things I came up with from that narrowing was actually trying to get them to engage with their other classmates, take it as a group that everybody's doing their individual plant, but at the same time, all of these different students could, they're living in different places. They're going to have different windows and be able, put it outside, or maybe add a little fertilizer, things that they could actually do a little experimentation with as they're learning and then be able to compare results with their friends. So we kind of narrowed it down, and just as a kind of sense, we do oregano, basil, both spring and fall, and then usually a little bit more herbs in the fall, and then tomatoes and peppers. And I do include both sweet and hot within our pepper families so that students can have some variety, but also get some differences. Even with the tomatoes and peppers, we've done different varieties so that there's some purple peppers, or there's some super hot small ones, or super hot large ones, so that they have some ability to have some choice and also engage really with that. The other thing that we've kind of changed is we went from these huge ice cream containers, and yes, we would be running 30 to 40 students, and my family would eat 30 to 40 half gallons of ice cream in order to help supply that throughout the year. And showing that, hey, you can even do it in a small tub. Like, you do not need a huge property. And we've actually gone all the way down to deli containers, that with some of our classes now, it's a little easier. And then we help them with the upsizing as the plants are getting ready. So that's kind of been some of our changes, but we've also started to expand and look to some of our other Penn State friends about including other plant families, home pollinator gardens, so that they can actually get some little plants that are going to help native pollinators in our region, things like milkweeds, as well as as listed here, marigolds, parsley, flowering annuals. We've had some students select flowering pet perennials, so that way they can actually do this as a part of their actual garden for the future. Penn State had offered a program like this, I believe with a small fee attached, so that way they could pay for some of the supplies. But for us, it was also going beyond the seed. In the top corner here, you can actually see our community garden pretty much in its heyday. When we did have a lot of community support, we had things they were bringing in trellises and growing up a lot of beans and peas. Some on the side is a couple of my colleagues who were working and founding the garden, and also getting grants to help us expand some of the resources available. And then I'm on the bottom with some of the native pollinators that we were working to add. And, the garden itself had this great magnetic attraction to folks until the pandemic. That was really when we saw our main garden kind of change its scope, that we went from having so many people interested in participating in the garden, that everybody had to have their particular spots, and we would have a waiting list, to essentially no man's land, that nobody really wanted to engage in the garden. And it would only be essentially the small group of us, as you see here, that would kind of take those next steps to try to keep it going. So, looking at the idea of having that demonstration gardening, having a place that people can actually go learn about some different plant species. We've tried to also include some trials where we'll have something that isn't part of the standard catalog, that's beyond what a pea or a bean might look like, or standard tomatoes, including some other heirloom varieties. Or one of my favorites was the introduction of cushaw squash at the garden, and seeing how that's not only sprawled, but that different produce that came out, that then we can teach about how that can be utilized in other foods. I actually do miss me some cushaw. But then also, because so much of this was done during COVID, and I had students who were sometimes involved, sometimes not, it's like, well, it was not uncommon then for not only them to be off because of COVID, but if I had the sniffles, you have to wait 2 weeks in order to come back. Kind of moments that it's like, well, how can I continue engaging them? And it's like, well, I had my garden at home. So I actually did garden tours of that, mini videos that I would show them, incorporating some of the different ideas that I was using to help promote sustainability, including our wall garden. So that we had taken different kinds of pots and put them on a piece of sheet metal that we had kind of built into a shed area, compared to the larger container garden that I have in small beds. And, you go from the top picture that's a little bit neater, really pretty sunflower, compared to sunflowers, squash, and oh no, weeds. You know, acknowledging weeds exist is one thing that can help, and then also showing how do we care for them. That you don't necessarily have to go out and buy every pesticide available in order to get rid of a bug or a weed that you see in the garden, that there are natural ways, and trying to help them understand what some of that organic gardening is. And it's one of the nice things that I've been able to reutilize some of these videos over the years in order to talk about specific feats. You know, the vertical gardening, for example, is one that um, I really like, and the students kind of find interesting because they're like, oh yeah, I have a wall like that, or I have a place where I can put something like that at home. And then we get them talking about how could they reuse other things around their homes in order to make some of those pots. So that's moments that are kind of helpful as well. One of the biggest things that we did during this phase was try to get them to be storytellers, get them involved by going through the process, but also documenting their experience. During COVID, especially, we had a lot of students who were really isolated, and being able to tell their story to someone helped them cope some. Um, at times, the comments came through, it's like, you know, youth through the journals are one of the only people I talk to outside of my family. And that's a really heartbreaking moment as a faculty member when you realize your students are that isolated. And unfortunately, I wished a lot of that stopped, but sometimes it doesn't, especially because they'll go to class, go to work, go home, and they're with their families, but there's not that much other activity that they're doing outside. So being able to tell people about things they actually find interesting, especially when your family might not, is interesting. Just to have a sense of what this might look like. And this is actually just me, so it's not even one of the student journals, but it kind of follows the lines that they were working with. And of course, the link decided not to work anymore. I apologize for that. But they're generally the idea of, hi, it's Wednesday. The plant grew a little bit, it's about 3 inches tall. It really seemed like it took a lot to get to this point, but I'm really excited. I really wonder when I get to actually start eating from this. Can I eat from this? And seeing what they could, you know, asking a few questions, trying to get a little bit common knowledge. And importing that kind of as a throughout group. Every day they were required for measurements to do height and to do photographic changes as well. We've also gone to many smaller projects so that they're not only doing the full plant, that we do a couple smaller pieces as part of a unit, that they'll do microgreens so that we give them a piece of coconut core. And then here I have with one that was from Hamana that they could actually just put right in water. And I'll usually demonstrate one of them, and I have it in my office. And then we have them make their own using coconut core and some seeds and paper toweling. And they get really similar effects, and they're like, oh, wow, that's really kind of cool. We've done mini hydroponics using, again, deli containers and lids. And then we help them cut out a hole and be able to put a seed pod nest in and use that as a secondary idea. I do also teach a dual enrollment course that's for high school students, so like juniors and seniors in high school, and they really love these two projects because they can put them in their windows in their bedrooms and actually follow them a little bit better than sometimes when they're putting their plants out in the greenhouse or the really sunny kitchen windows. So, and they're also shorter times so that you're not necessarily doing it over the entire semester, so you're not worrying as much, but you're still getting a different type of experience utilizing plants. One of my other favorite types of ways to incorporate gardening and life lessons about gardening and sustainability comes from food scrap gardening and regrowing different kinds of plants from the stuff we would normally throw away. And the first year we actually started talking through this, they were very skeptical of me. And they're like, Yeah, it was just like YouTube, and it was like one of those things that it was really fake. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm, Miss Smith, that's just what it is. And I'm like, no, like, let's try this. Let's put some of them and see what we can do. I'll take bunch, like, I'll do some at the house with whatever I have. You guys try and see what you can get. And we talk about some of these things that if we look in also our heritage, at the end of the season, you didn't just throw out a potato that had eyes on it. You made it and brought it back to the garden and went to another year. And that got you more potatoes. And bringing back some of those lessons that, you know, I was lucky enough to learn from my family, but some of these students have not had that ability. And showing them, yes, some of them come out really well, some of them take forever. So the one in the center, for example, of taking forever is a lemon tree that I grew from seed. For the sake of saying, hey, I grew a lemon tree from a seed that is probably about 5 years old now and is still in my kitchen window and about the same, maybe 6 to 12 inches high. That the some things aren't perfect, and you're not going to grow the apple seed into an apple tree producing apples in one season, but you might be able to get a second bunch of celery, at least for greens or onions, and make them go farther and see what that actually brings. That there is more value sometimes in those scraps. Taking in doing compost, we've done lessons with that as well, trying to show that there's so many different ways these materials can be utilized before they necessarily have to become garbage and then lead to things like carbon dioxide increases and methane decomposition, taking up waste in our waste facilities. What can we do better? How can we try to save ourselves a little money? Because that always is a great helping note. But more importantly, how do we actually just try to live better so that the resources we have can extend into those next generations as well? Oh, direction. But then also, I would say, think food. The original idea of having them participate in the harvest and get to tasting food got revamped, but we are doing it nowadays. That you have to consider. People love food. I love food. And when we think about food, there you can do simple things and challenge people to think about what they can actually get in their own region. So we've had a couple of different ways we've done this. We host a walk in the woods every October, and we give out food as part of it. So there's like muffins, cookies, but for example, one of the stickers we put on, this bag contains blueberry muffin. Pennsylvania has 4 native varieties of blueberries, and talk about them. If we had raspberries, we could talk about the different raspberries. Like this semester, my students are actually foraging some of the berries we have on campus in order to help me make jam and pies later this season. But we've also tried to get across the university a native food trial that utilizing things that are local to our campuses or to our immediate regions, and then having small luncheons or meals that the students can participate in, but also learn how to cook them. This fall, we're actually going to be having our chef host one of these events. Normally, it's just within my class, but we're actually opening this one to the campus. The last thing I do in my environmental science class is actually a harvest meal. It's our last day of class, and depending on exactly how the semester falls, it could either be right before our Thanksgiving break, when then they come back essentially for finals, or right after Thanksgiving break, and we're essentially getting ready for the winter holidays like Christmas. And this is just a couple of examples of simple things we did. Raspberry cranberry sauce, so that the raspberries were literally from my yard. The cranberries were from the up for about 3-hour drive in the mid-Atlantic. Honey from Penn State University Park, our larger campus, and then water that you got out of the tap, right? Simple recipe, but something that had a little bit of different flavor in it. We did mashed potatoes. Schuylkill County is a huge grower of mashed potatoes, so we've been able to get some really great potatoes from the area and then bring in butter. When it comes to butter, literally at the one end of our campus is a milk facility, and they make milk, sour cream, butter, and the whole likes. So we were able to show some of these things locally. The milk, I will say, was from my local area instead of theirs, but we also have like a larger other milk facility that some of our faculty and staff, it's their family farm. So we try to get that story in there. And then finally, something they might not ever experience, which was winter squash. It was a combination, in this case, of delicata and acorn that we were able to get from a local farmer, included with butter and maple syrup from a local syrup farm. And it's like, we just made them as simple pieces, and then everybody take what you feel, try something new if you haven't before. And we actually have had some really picky eaters that are very sensitive to the different palate textures. And, they're like, I don't know if I would eat it again, but it was actually kind of not bad. And that actually was like the hugest compliment from these students, who I know happen to be among some of my pickiest eaters and have a lot of other sensory issues. But it's something that gets them past that and gets them talking about it. It's like, well, if you don't like that, what did you usually have for Thanksgiving? And then is there a better way that you can have that more sustainably? Can you get some of that stuff within our region? Can you consider going to our local farmers and having their version of maybe the different squash they grow versus what you might want in stores? Or, the sweet potatoes aren't as common in Schuylkill County. What about having a combination between the mashed potatoes and the squash? Many of my students have never experienced chestnuts, and Pennsylvania was a great chestnut land. So getting them to actually taste some chestnuts was a big deal for us, and seeing the different nut varieties that you can actually grow in our region to expand some of the ways that they can connect to the food and think, okay, if I can't drive there, should I necessarily be eating it? If I can't get to that region, why should I be bringing some of these foods in from very, very distant lands that are going to have extra carbon emissions adding to our atmosphere when I have a lot of variety of foods right around me? And teaching them about what are some of those things is been actually really a great experience. One of the things that they love that I don't have pictured here, but we've done the last few years, and I even do it in spring, because they're more available, is we do an apple tart, utilizing local apples as well as like butter and not sugar, but honey. Because again, we're trying to keep everything more local. In the case of honey, now our campus actually has an apiary. So it's like, no, we can actually say this is our Schuylkill County honey because it came literally from the work that your friends put into it. And some of them having that next level of connection, oh my God, this is using our stuff, is really cool. And they really get excited. And as an instructor, I think that's sometimes the way we have to bridge it, is that something might seem scary because it's different, or this might seem hard because I've never done it. But if you actually get out there and do it, there's a greater possibility that you're going to feel comfortable with it. And more importantly, that you're going to take a skill with you into the future. As a tip to kind of everybody out there, one of the things I would say is that connect with your local resources. Throughout our country, we have extension offices from our land-grant university. So especially those of you in Pennsylvania, from like Pennsylvania, the Northeast, places like Penn State Extension, we have those local people who have expertise in different areas of gardening, and they really want to connect with us. They want to connect with other people. Local organizations. Here I list from our county, our Schuylkill, which is an agency that's done some great work with me that I'll talk about in a second, as well as the conservation districts that are scattered throughout our country that have had so much with soil conservation and water conservation. Even though I've been an environmental educator for too many years now. Um, Probably what, more than 15. It wasn't until probably the last 5 years that I actually learned what the conservation districts did. That there's so many resources there that they're looking in many cases for other organizations to partner with and learn more what through. That also is a great way to extend out to young people. So one of the things I would definitely say about working with our local connections is that there's so many resources you don't necessarily think about. If you have larger projects, so many of them are great helps and help build experiences. So on the in the bottom, we actually have a picture of some of my students working with one of our retired local foresters who happen to be from that conservation, uh, our Schuylkill Conservation District. He has so much knowledge. Like Frank will forget more than I will probably ever know at this rate of about trees and their uses. But he has so much that he's willing to tell and story tell with students. And he helps with the walks and we go through and he comes and tells students different stories and we do different trees every year. So that way him and I don't get bored through it. But then also being able to help each other through community grants, that there's some projects they're looking to do, but they need an education partner. And here at the college, we want to be that partner. We want to connect out with our local communities. And I know so many of the universities throughout the country are saying kind of the same portion. It's like, no, listen, we're here. We are your resource. And we want to be your community partner for projects and help see how we can work together. Because there's many ways that sometimes our research overlaps with the community projects. If there's a way for me to get my students out there getting experience and it can help you along the way, I'm willing to have that conversation. The other thing that I definitely have been able to benefit from is the fact that through help with Frank and some of our other conservancy members, Penn State Schuylkill was able to earn our level 1 Arboretum accreditation through ArbNet. And that's a national accreditation system. And getting the documentation system up and running at that point was a barrier for me. I was working on an Excel spreadsheet and trying to get notes from as many people as I could. And yet in essentially 4 days, between Frank, a friend Jerry, and like me, we went through and mapped over 300 trees. And then it actually led to us being able to found, as with some of the other parts of university, the Commonwealth Arboretum Network, where we're trying to utilize our relationship to trees and plants in order to help educate the public as well as help push research in these areas forward and being able to have a voice in how our campuses grow and with what. How do we protect biodiversity? How do we educate the community about what some of these challenges now and into the future are going to be? So that's been really such a blessing. And then being able to ask him, so what are you guys seeing across the rest of the area? Like what trees are doing well? What diseases should I be worried about next before they actually get to my campus? Because they're in communication with so many other folks that as a faculty member, I'm trying not to be in the ivory tower, but sometimes they take it that I am. And I want to be out there with our community and seeing how we can help. We've even been able to host as a distribution site for tree giveaways. But a lot of that has been built up further because of our relationships with each other. So again, like connect with your educational institutions. The colleges and universities can be great partners, especially for larger projects that might also have research connections, but also high schools and elementaries that lessons about different pieces, especially around Earth Day or Arbor Day, Soil Day, can be really important lessons that sometimes, because the schools now are facing such constrictions, can have some of those relationships. And that maybe, it is a couple of bags of soil that somebody is able to bring these pieces together and help get more of these experiences out to students. I'd also say let young people take the lead. So here I have two of my students who have had very different paths to their plant lives. I'm going to focus on in this slide on what would be the right with the young gentleman and some plastic piping. And he was actually going, that's Nick, and he was going for plant sciences and trying to kind of come up with some new ways to utilize the kind of poor soil Schuylkill County has in areas. We have a lot of areas that are dealing with mine reclamation and poor soils from that anthracite mining history. And we're not saying we're trying to push our history away. It's like, how can we take that land and bring it into this new world? How can we help sponsor different types of agriculture? And he wanted to see how different slopes would be affecting plant growth. And he actually came up with this entire setup using plastic pipes and trying to create different bed heights so that we can compact some of the soil down and then see if the plants would grow. And he actually had some different layers of success. Our bigger issue that semester ended up that in that garden, which is the same community garden that was not being as utilized. You can see it's wonderful weeds in the background. It was we ended up getting multiple yellow jacket nests, and he's slightly allergic, so we were waiting on our facilities folks to help us get rid of them. But with what he was able to see, we did see some differences, but we were still able to see that they would grow. And that was actually, of the two things, one of the bigger issues we were worried about. That second young gentleman, I'm going to say, is also a way of changing growth and changing attitudes. So this is my research assistant, James, and he's been with me now for 4 years. And for the first 2.5 years, if you said plant, come on, James, let's go out and plant something. Miss Smith, I'm going to be a veterinarian. What do I need to know about plants for? Was the common phrase. And I hate plants. Why do we have to study plants? I'm a biology major. Why do I have to study plants? Was a regular phrase for us. And yet I made him actually help me plant those trees that came in very, very small containers. And yet all of a sudden, his attitude started changing. Because he started coming saying, hey, Miss Smith, do you have something else we could grow? Like, yeah, we have some seeds. How about we grow something? We'll grow some herbs for because it's getting a little late in the season. Oh, awesome. That sounds great. And we have the glow lights, as you can see. And, oh, hey, this is really nice. I actually kind of like this. This is kind of relaxing. It's like, yeah, I've been trying to tell you that, James. Plants aren't bad. It's like, but Miss Smith, you do them differently. I'm like, no, I actually want you to care about it. I want you to be invested. And now, so that's him in the greenhouse at the campus. And then the other two pictures are actually of his own plant collection. So that he bought a mini greenhouse for his garage that he was using this winter. And then as soon as the weather broke, essentially started taking over the entire patio with his new plant collection. The attitude again with such hatred towards plants has completely changed. It's shifted so much that I have to say, James, don't stop at the plant store or the plant tents on your way into campus, because we literally would have one at the base by our campus. It's like, don't stop there, just come straight in. But it changed him, and he now is looking at how this relates to his career. How does it mean that I'm a veterinary scientist, but how can I incorporate plants? How can I use plants to help my animals? How can I use plants to change maybe a medicine? Or more importantly, how do I prevent some of these issues by preventing what they might get into? So I would like to thank you all for your attention, for coming today, and now open it up to the questions.
That is great. Thank you so much, Marianne. Wow. Your enthusiasm is contagious. Thank you for sharing your experience with us, and thank you for doing the good work on the ground, working with these young people day in and day out in your classes. Um, Feel free to put some questions for Marianne here in the chat. Now is your time to learn from this expert here. A couple questions that I maybe have, Marianne. So starting out, like you mentioned that universities and you also gave a great shout out to community extension or county extension and county conservation. But these can be great resources for us that we can take from. But how can we support you back? So most people here are maybe gardeners or maybe farmers, or they run seed libraries or things. What would you say is a pretty common need of local universities from us?
Sometimes I would say it's knowing that resources exist because a lot of times, we have students who will come to us and may not realize in their own communities they have these resources, but that they're the new partnerships helping education to younger generations. Um, a lot, even with the coming together with the universities to host programs for the local intermediate units or educational units that your region might have, the elementary school. And especially this time of year, it's a great time for summer campers, right? And so as much as there's so many great educators out there, God bless you, because there's definitely a lot of energy in them little young ones. But at the same time, we can bring in a different look to also help you guys realize or help them realize, hey, I like plants, I could do science. I like this, I could do that. And realizing, these are times when hearing different kinds of voices that aren't your family can be great experiences to get students involved in our environment, whether that be the outdoors as in animals and animals and plants that are native or in our cultivated crops. From so many students I've heard over the years, oh yeah, I wouldn't want to be a blank. And it's like, but why? What do you know about that? And when we can't see careers, and that's where I think the great partnerships can occur because you have local gardeners who, have done great work on their properties, and can give us great demonstrations of things they've done to save water or bring in natives or have that combination of the flowers and the eats, and that it doesn't have to be one or the other, that it doesn't have to be exactly super pretty, that you can have different variations, because for us, even as the university, Penn State has 26 campuses. Even if I took one campus and did a variation in everything, I still wouldn't get across the spectrum that we see with so many of our neighbors.
Mhm.
And being able to sometimes just showcase that is a great highlight as well. But also, having those days when you come visit campus, that we're places to come visit, come ask questions about us. Right now I'm at not my campus because we were just coming back from vacation, but I'm at Penn State Mount Alto, and it's a historic arboretum. And some of the trees around here are over 200 years old. On my campus, we have a state champion in one of our box elders. As you're near, often take a walk around, ask questions about it, because that to us is that moment of community engagement, that reminding us we're part of your community. Even if we do have a fence around the place, it doesn't mean truly like, never come by us. We want to get to know the community because sometimes you'll ask a question or give us a statement and maybe it's something we never thought about, or it's something that it relates to our work in a different way. Or maybe there's a community need that we're not necessarily hearing.
Mhm.
And I like to think sometimes that as a university, we have the ability to help bring people together in a different way. That because we hear different voices, whether it be from our students or just people we meet in the community, and they say, "Oh, you're from Penn State? Like, did you know about this?" That it can actually help us understand more about what's going on and maybe even be able to help target projects that we can work on as well.
Mm. Well, yeah, that's great. I'm hearing be curious, reach out.
Yeah, be curious, reach out. We are
Hmm.
friendly. Generally, we are
Hmm.
friendly.
That is great. So most of us on this call are not environmental educators or not people who interact with large groups of students or young people on a daily basis. So how could we help translate this into the neighborhood kid or our grandkid or high schoolers that we see once a week that just happen to come by the farmer's market while I'm there? What kind of influence can we have on these people in our life that aren't in this big group where you can force them or grade them by whether or not they
Great.
put a seed in a pot?
Absolutely. It's amazing how much grades have impacts. Um, and that's actually one of the things that I've worked to get students against is don't worry about the grade about it. Worry about the experience. I
Hmm.
want to hear about your experience. The experience is what's going to get you a good grade, not the fact that you killed your plant. But the other thing that I think is really easy is sometimes, even in a farmer's market, having, like, if you have something that's a different variety than, I'm thinking, I happen to love delicata squash, but having a little note about it, like what kind of, what's its scientific name or what kind of conditions might be helpful for its growth. Just those little moments can be things that you take with you. The first time I experienced Kusha squash was one where it was it had a sign next to it of Southern sweet potato. And I'm like, okay, this does not look like any sweet potato I've ever seen. And then I asked the lady about it, and she's like, oh, we sometimes use it in pies. Okay, so I took that home and started to learn more about it. Sorry, there's a 911 alert system check, of course,
Oh, okay.
but all is well. Um, then I started looking into it more and learned, this is something that has been around for really, over several centuries, stores really well, and some argue make a better pie compared to pumpkin. And it's like, well, that's really interesting. That's something that you don't necessarily see often in the farmers markets, or you see it as a gourd, and yet it
Mm.
has a lot of purpose. So sometimes just little notes about the foods, whether if it's an heirloom variety, especially, I think just even the idea of what heirloom means, because we often will have a conversation in my classes. Well, what does this heirloom thing mean? Like, are they that old that grandma had them? I'm like, well, kind of, and not at the same time. They're not the seeds that grandma actually had in her cupboard, but, from 20 years ago, but they are varieties that have been around, and we know that they work so much better in some of our regions, that
Mhm.
they've been tailored. There was a reason why grandma's crops usually did really well because she saved her seeds and then was able to keep, bringing these things out year after year, and it got used to your environment. And students think that's often awesome because it's like, you mean there's only not one just kind of tomato or one kind of pepper? Like, what do you mean? That's crazy. So those kind of moments I think are really easy. And even could do that in your own home garden. A little note about things that especially that might be by walkways. Great thing to sometimes just spark interest because students will tend to see, a little note. Ooh, what is that? They love
Mhm.
QR codes. That's their other thing. Give them a
Yes,
QR code. It doesn't matter to what, they will go to it.
you are echoing our keynote here. This morning, Dr. Pell mentioned yard signs as an easy way to help educate and let
Mhm.
let people know what's going on. So that's great. All right. What are next steps if we were to sign up for your environmental studies class coming up and you had your dream class? What is something that you haven't gotten the chance to do that you would like to do?
Like part of me still is actually trying to move them back to our garden. Not that I'm going to give up the plant project itself, that the take home plant, but we're actually trying to convert our garden right now into not just a native pollinator garden, but a native food garden so that they would be perennial foods that would be able to last within in the garden, in part to help take some of the stress off us for caring for some of these annuals and bringing them year after year. But also, I think more importantly, given some of those food insecurity issues, being able to open up new sources of foods to students so that we're installing some different types of berries across it, some different nuts. So that way, through different parts of the season, there are things that they can and essentially forage on, and trying to get that as more of a sustainable landscape in that respect, that it's something that's going to last for years. We don't necessarily have to add as much care, and let them kind of take the lead as well on things they want to see. So that some of my beekeeping students have also become very environmentally interested. So they're actually trying to lead, like, well, what else can we grow? What can we grow? We want the bees to like it because we want more honey. Like that is a bottom line most times. But they're definitely looking at what else can help them. Like how can they become healthier? And that's both the bees and them. So the fact that they're asking those questions is to me kind of interesting, that we're starting to change their perceptions as we go along, even if it is by little steps.
Mhm. Beautiful. Then one final question. So
Mhm.
I worked as an environmental educator going to K through 12 schools prior to this position here at Seed Savers. And what I saw and what broke my heart over and over again is the amount of climate anxiety among our youth here in the US. I am curious about how you see that show up in your students, and then what strategies do you develop to help address that?
So yeah, we're definitely seeing it all the way up through even their senior years in college. They have a higher anxiety. I would probably argue than most generations, that there's so many things going on in their world and the uncertainty, even in their own families, that a lot of them are looking for escapes. Some of them take that virtually, but I think there's a great opportunity to bring it as going out to the garden, going old school, if you may, to go out in the garden, talk to the plants. If you're angry, you put some plants that pick some weeds. You can obliterate them and take some anger out. And just finding, as much, I want them to be more social. And I know that for many of them, that's in its own right an anxiety. But even just having someone else to talk to, if you're someone else has to be a plant, that's totally okay. And seeing that if they are interested in these things, trying to get them more engaged. Like, oh, no, hey, you want to? Come on. I have more stuff in the greenhouse you can help plant. We're always looking for help. And welcoming them. I think that's the other thing is, and that was one of the issues our garden actually faced or when I came, is that it was off limits. You had to ask permission to even walk in it. And it's like, no, they did want you to ask permission for cleaning up because we were trying to protect native pollinators and the leaves. But that kind of misinterpretation pushed them away. And now it's no, get in there. It's like, we'll tell you, just be careful of certain things. We don't want you to pull a perennial, but, take considerations of getting them involved and trying to, if you're with them, all right, and interacting with them, then that's another way to engage them in the learning process, but also the help process, because they have much younger, better backs than the rest of us.
Well, yes, I think you're doing exactly the good work. You're doing the experiential, hands-on, giving them skills that are transferable and building that initial confidence past the I killed my house plant
Yep,
to I can at least sprout some corn. It grows, it
exactly.
sprouts
They
real
even
quick.
if
There
they
it is.
right, like even for our kids who are like doing their plants in November, December, they'll often get them to sprout. They won't get really huge, but I'm like, guys, you
Mhm.
got it to sprout. Like now we're just gonna shift that 3 months and you can put it in the garden.
Right,
You
right, right,
didn't
right.
really kill it. Nature did. And that's because nature said it was time to go to sleep.
Mm. And then connecting them throughout and encouraging them to tell their stories and listen to each other
Exactly.
and learn from one another.
And then
Cool.
the hope that they just continue asking more questions and, potentially going out and buying that pack of seeds.
Well, this has been an absolute joy, Marianne. Thank you so
Awesome.
much
Thank
for
you so
joining
much.
us.
Yeah. And thank you all for coming.
Yes. So, um, uh, thank you to Marianne Smith, and thank you to our audience for sticking with us. As you have heard a few times this morning, we here at Seed Savers are incredibly excited. We are less than a month away to our big 50th celebration here in Decorah, Iowa, right here on Heritage Farm. So if you have the ability to join us, we would love to see you here. This is the time. This is the time to come and see us. Lots of keynote speakers, lots of workshops and tours and hay rides and lots of great food planned. So if you're able to make it, please join us. Go ahead, registration is open. Go ahead and get your ticket today. All right, so we have another session coming up for you in about 15 minutes. This next session is Plant It Forward, Expanding Gardening Access One Seed at a Time, hosted by two high school students. So please stay with us and we will see you then.